What if I told you one of the largest media deals in history was destined to fail before the ink was even dry? In 2018, a corporate titan spent $85 billion to build an empire. 3 years later, they would walk away, not with a crown, but with a mountain of debt and a legacy of strategic failure. This wasn't just a bad investment. It was a corporate catastrophe that dismantled a Hollywood kingdom and revealed a fatal flaw in how one of the world's biggest companies saw the future. The players were giants in their fields. On one side, AT&T, a 140-year-old telecommunications behemoth. The company that built the pipes, the networks, and the wireless infrastructure that connect modern America. On the other, Time Warner, a content kingdom controlling some of the most valuable cultural assets on the planet. HBO, the gold standard of television. Warner Bros., the studio behind Harry Potter and The Dark Knight. And CNN, a global news leader. The logic seemed simple. AT&T owned the distribution. Time Warner owned the content. By combining them, they would create an untouchable, vertically integrated media superpower. So how did this $85 billion deal of the century unravel into one of the most spectacular corporate blunders of the modern era? That's the question we're answering today. To understand this disaster, we have to break down the 3 critical errors that doomed the merger from the start. By the mid-2010s, AT&T faced an existential threat. They were becoming a dumb pipe. Their massive network was essential, but the real value, and customer loyalty, was being captured by companies like Netflix, Google, and Facebook. These were the services that flowed through AT&T's pipes. AT&T's CEO at the time, Randall Stephenson, saw the writing on the wall. The future wasn't just in connecting people, it was in owning what people connect with. The strategy was vertical integration. The idea was to create a powerful feedback loop. AT&T could use its vast user data to create and market content, then deliver that content exclusively through its own network, locking customers into its ecosystem. On paper, it was a compelling vision. By owning HBO, Warner Bros., and the Turner networks, AT&T wouldn't just be your internet provider. They would be your entertainment provider, your news source, and your direct connection to culture. They could bundle HBO Max with their wireless plans. They could use viewing data to sell hyper-targeted ads, creating a new revenue stream to rival Google and Facebook. The U.S. Department of Justice sued to block the deal, arguing it would give one company too much power. But in 2018, the courts sided with AT&T. The deal was done. The new division was named Warner Media, and AT&T was ready to build its empire. But this grand vision overlooked a simple, brutal truth. Owning a content factory is not the same as knowing how to run one. This brings us to the second critical error, a catastrophic clash of cultures. AT&T is a telecommunications company based in Dallas, Texas. Its culture is famously bureaucratic, data-driven, and focused on operational efficiency. It's an engineers company, built on predictability, 5-year plans, and managing physical infrastructure. Time Warner was the polar opposite. It was a federation of creative entities in New York and Hollywood. Its culture was built on relationships, talent, and taking massive creative risks. In Hollywood, you don't build a hit movie with a spreadsheet. You build it by betting on visionary directors, writers, and actors, and giving them the freedom to create. AT&T's management tried to impose its telecom culture onto its new Hollywood acquisition. Randall Stephenson and his successor, John Stankey, were telecom executives. They viewed content as an asset to be optimized, not an art to be nurtured. They talked about the need for HBO to become bigger, to churn out more content to fill their new streaming service, HBO Max. This directly contradicted the fewer, bigger, better philosophy that had made HBO a global icon of quality. The tension was immediate. Seasoned media executives, who understood the delicate ecosystem of Hollywood, were pushed aside or left in frustration. The most symbolic departure was that of Richard Plepler, the celebrated CEO of HBO. Plepler was the architect of HBO's golden age, greenlighting shows like Game of Thrones. He left after it became clear that AT&T's leadership intended to fundamentally change the network's DNA. This wasn't just a management shuffle. It was a brain drain. AT&T had bought one of the most successful creative engines in the world, and their first move was to fire the mechanics and try to re-engineer the engine themselves. The very thing that made Time Warner valuable, its creative culture, was being systematically dismantled. The final nail in the coffin was the staggering amount of debt AT&T took on to close the deal. The $85 billion price tag, combined with Time Warner's existing debt, pushed AT&T's total debt load to over $180 billion. It was one of the most indebted non-financial companies in the world. This colossal debt created immense pressure. The Warner Media acquisition couldn't be a long-term project. It needed to generate massive amounts of cash, and it needed to do it immediately. This financial pressure collided with the expensive reality of the new media landscape, the streaming wars. As AT&T was finalizing its deal, Disney was preparing Disney+, Apple was launching Apple TV+, and Netflix was spending billions a year on original content. To compete, AT&T had to pour billions into its own streaming service, HBO Max. This put the company in an impossible position. It had to service its massive debt, invest heavily in its core 5G network to compete with Verizon and T-Mobile, and fund a fantastically expensive content war against the most powerful media and tech companies on Earth. They were fighting a war on three fronts, and the debt was their anchor. This desperation led to one of the most controversial decisions in modern Hollywood history. In late 2020, in a bid to drive HBO Max subscriptions during the pandemic, Warner Media announced its entire 2021 slate of blockbuster films, including Dune and The Matrix Resurrections, would be released simultaneously in theaters and on the streaming service. The move, internally known as Project Popcorn, was made without consulting the filmmakers, actors, or production partners. It sent shockwaves through the industry. Top-tier talent like director Christopher Nolan, a longtime Warner Bros. Partner, publicly blasted the decision. It was seen as a profound betrayal, sacrificing long-term theatrical profits and crucial creative relationships for a short-term subscription boost. It was a telecom solution to a Hollywood problem, and it was a disaster. And that brings us to the core insight. The AT&T and Time Warner merger wasn't a failure of vision. It was a failure of understanding. AT&T didn't buy a content company. They thought they bought a new type of asset to plug into their existing telecommunications machine. They saw HBO's library and Warner Bros.' intellectual property as inventory for their network. They fundamentally misunderstood that the value of a media company isn't the content it already owns. It's the culture, the talent, and the creative autonomy that produces the next generation of great content. By prioritizing synergy over creativity, by installing telecom executives to manage artists, and by letting a mountain of debt dictate creative strategy, AT&T systematically broke the very thing they had paid $85 billion to acquire. They bought a magic goose that laid golden eggs and decided to re-engineer it for mass production, killing the goose in the process. The strategy wasn't just flawed, it was arrogant. It was a profound miscalculation born from believing that success in one industry translates to expertise in another. If this breakdown is giving you a new perspective on corporate strategy, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. We unlock stories like this every week. The final chapter was swift. By 2021, less than 3 years after the deal closed, AT&T admitted defeat. They announced they were spinning off Warner Media and merging it with Discovery Incorporated to form a new, independent company, Warner Bros. Discovery. AT&T walked away, not as a media empire, but as a humbled telecom company, still saddled with enormous debt from its failed conquest. The merger stands as a monumental case study in the dangers of diversification, diversifying into a business you don't fundamentally understand. More importantly, it is a powerful lesson in the immense value and fragility of corporate culture. You can acquire assets and intellectual property, but you cannot simply buy a creative culture. You must understand it, respect it, and protect it. AT&T did none of those things, and it cost them billions. If you learned something new, hit the like button and subscribe for more strategy breakdowns. And let us know in the comments, what company's strategy should we unlock next?